Good afternoon and welcome to the Bellingham City Council committee meetings, continuing this afternoon at 1:00 p.m. Today is March 22nd, 2021, and the one committee meeting we have this afternoon is Committee of the Whole. And I wanted to make mention that Councilmember Vargas is not with us this afternoon and her absence is excused. I believe everybody else is present. We're waiting on Councilmember Lillquist, but I expect that we will all be here. Oh, nope, I see Councilmember Lillquist. Okay, so the items before us this afternoon, just a quick update that the first item that was in the packet that we received as council members is actually an evening presentation. So that item, Agenda Bill 22944, that will be picked up this evening as a presentation at the beginning of the meeting. And so that means that the first item before us is Agenda Bill 22945, which is approval of mayor's appointment of city attorney. And I believe that Mayor Fleetwood was planning to make that.
Hannah, sorry to interrupt. I believe that email we received, was that also going to be moved to the evening?
City attorney's nodding yes. Okay, we'll move both of them. Thanks, Brian, as well. So we will move both of those items, which means we have one item before us, but somewhat of a weighty item before us. This is Agenda Bill 22930, which is part 2 in a series of staff presentations in preparation for City Council adoption of the 2021-2022 Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, Action Plan. And so as the agenda bill states, in preparation for the 2021-2022 HUD action plan to be submitted in May, so that will be coming up soon, staff is presenting on the housing and services program with discussion to follow on funding priorities. So this series, just a reminder for the public, is 4 discussions to occur. One that took place at our last meeting on March 8th. Our last regular meeting. That was a discussion of capital projects. Today is discussion number 2, which is a discussion with partner agencies focused on housing services programs that address the needs of vulnerable families with children. And then going forward, we will have the 3rd report, which will be a report on community development and advisory board recommendations. And then the final 4th meeting will be a discussion and adoption of the full HUD annual action plan with resolutions scheduled for April 26th, 2021 to have us in everything in queue in time for that May deadline. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Tara Sundin.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction. It's going to keep my remarks even briefer than they already are going to be. I will come back at the end of the presentation and propose staff's recommendation to you on the additional $250,000 that the City Council put into the 21 budget and another $250,000 into the 2022 budget. But here today to help Samia and I present, we have Terry Bryant, the director of the Whatcom Homeless Services Center, Debbie Payton from the Opportunity Council's Community Resource Center, Rochelle Hale and Emily O'Connor with Lydia Place, and Tony Caselli from Bellingham and Whatcom County Housing Authorities. So Samia and I have been working with these agencies as well as Whatcom County staff for the past several weeks, well, for years, but very focused the last several weeks on trying to make some real difference here in this particular segment of our community. So I'm going to turn it over to Samia, who will set the stage for today's topic and introduce the next speaker. Thank you, Samia.
Thank you, Tara. Samia Lutz with Planning and Community Development. As Tara mentioned, we're going to soon turn it over to our partner agencies. But first, I just want to set this stage briefly by talking about how our housing system is set up to assist families with children, what the context is, and what roadblocks are preventing that movement toward housing stability. Families find themselves in a crisis situation and in need of help for a variety of reasons, some of which are shown on this graphic in the gray clouds. The usual economic challenges have been exacerbated by COVID this year, and families who are once able to share housing following an unexpected eviction or other emergency have been frequently unable to do so due to the need for social distancing this year. Once families are offered emergency housing, as you see in the blue boxes, most frequently in a motel, they're assessed for their needs, barriers, and vulnerabilities, and paired with an appropriate program and a housing case manager. Or in limited circumstances, they might be assisted through a diversion program that's designed to help them avoid entering the homeless services programs to begin with. Those that enter a rapid rehousing, that's the RRH, or permanent supportive housing, that's the PSH program, are offered supports that are appropriate to their situation, most commonly consisting of help finding housing, and then referrals to things like child care, employment, mental health services, and then rental assistance. Some households can get back on their feet within a year, but others need much longer term supports in the way of long-term rental vouchers and perhaps long-term behavioral health supports or other supports as they're helped toward as much self-sufficiency as possible. The movement forward requires the system to be robust, and the orange box at the bottom depicts the ways in which roadblocks, especially this year, have prevented movement forward. So our partners are going to talk both about the flow through this system towards self-sufficiency and about the roadblocks that have come up this year. And I'll just introduce those briefly, but you'll hear more about them from our partners. For families to get help, they need to accept that help and also have trusted case managers and supports. And that trust has been especially challenged this year as one-on-one interactions have been difficult. Agencies also need to have sufficient case management staff capacity and be able to find rental units in the community that are available, and then also have sufficient rental subsidy dollars or vouchers to pair the family with that unit. And agencies need to have the overall administrative capacity to manage the growing need and the relationships within our community to make referrals to services like childcare and other supports. So with that brief overview, I will turn it over to Terry Bryant with the Whatcom Homeless Service Center.
Thanks, Samia. Thanks for the opportunity to present today. I'm Terry Bryant. I'm the director of the Whatcom Homeless Service Center, which is a Department of Opportunity Council. My department houses several programs, the largest being Whatcom County's Coordinated Entry System. Could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Coordinated Entry is a crisis triage response to homelessness. It's a HUD-identified best practice to provide low barrier access, standardized assessment, and prioritization of households with the highest needs for housing programs. It's designed to give all applicants a fair chance at a housing program as opposed to favoring those who may have a skilled advocate. And I want to be really frank about the reality that there's not enough resources in this system to serve the need. I'm going to start by orienting you to the system for all types of households, and then I'll explain the path specific to families with children experiencing homelessness within this system. The amount of applications for families with children specifically in this system has increased by 44% since the onset of the pandemic. The system uses one application for households experiencing literal homelessness to apply for many homeless housing programs. Some are offered by Opportunity Council, but many others are also offered by our partner providers. This means that households don't have to find each program on their own and maintain their position on many wait lists. Instead, there's just one application. There are several access points in our community, but Opportunity Council's Community Resource Center in Debbie Payton's Community Services Department conducts about 90% of applications. You'll also hear that referred to as intakes and prioritization assessments. Other access points include the Homeless Outreach Team, or HOT, and several of our partner agencies such as Northwest Youth Services or Lydia Place, for example. Instead of a wait list, households are entered into the housing pool. Instead of referrals occurring chronologically, Referrals to these programs are made by coordinated entry system staff based on program criteria, level of household vulnerability, and the length of time the household has been experiencing homelessness. It's not on a first come, first served basis. The intake process consists of collecting the household's housing history, their needs, and any barriers they may have to obtaining housing. The assessment analyzes various life domains such as use of emergency services, legal concerns, risk of harm, socialization and daily functioning, wellness, and family stability. This establishes a level of household vulnerability. That level of vulnerability indicates which households would be best served by a minimal, moderate, or intensive housing intervention. Diversion or deposit assistance are examples of minimal intervention. Transitional housing or rapid rehousing are examples of a moderate intervention, and permanent supportive housing is the intensive intervention. Minimal interventions are typically very brief, one-time assistance that enables the household in crisis to restabilize in housing. This is what diversion was Samuel was mentioning, meaning that the household was diverted from enrollment in a housing program and their housing instability was resolved. Moderate interventions are time limited. Transitional housing programs are typically site-based, and the household would have to leave that housing to their own unit independently at the end of the program. Rapid rehousing programs are actually permanent housing in the sense that the lease for the unit is in the household's name, but they will receive some time-limited rental subsidy and case management support as they progress towards independence. Permanent supportive housing interventions are for households with the highest vulnerability and the longest periods of time experiencing homelessness. However, families with unsheltered children presenting for services are also offered a motel stay, provided we have capacity to do so. Our community does not have a site-based family shelter, not on the scale that we need. So we really struggle to meet this need with motel stays as they enter the coordinated entry system. Typically, the stay in a motel ends with their homelessness resolved with a minimal intervention or referral to a moderate or an intensive intervention. Most of the families with children in our system are served by rapid rehousing programs. Next slide, please. Thank you. This slide illustrates the path for families with children specifically. As I mentioned, the motel stay is offered to those with unsheltered children as they enter the system. And the assessment process indicates which type of program a household will likely be referred to. The pandemic and resulting economic crisis has created a bottleneck in the path to housing for families in two ways. Families are struggling to leave the system, which means that families are also struggling to enter the system. Our community providers enjoy a partnership with the Housing Authority in the form of housing choice vouchers that families with children who are unable to achieve financial independence can still achieve self-sufficiency with the assistance of a permanent housing subsidy. We tend to call these preference vouchers. So that would be the white bubble to the lower part of this slide. Unfortunately, at the onset of the pandemic, this resource was halted. And this caused a lot of families to be unable to move out of the rapid rehousing programs. Many families in these programs on the path to independence had income interruptions related to employment or childcare, keeping them in a temporary intervention for much longer than usual, needing a deeper rental subsidy and case management support for a longer period of time. When households can't move through that rapid rehousing intervention to stability, fewer program openings become available to households entering the system. This creates a bottleneck in our effort to shelter families. They have no program to exit the motel to, which has led to the situation we see ourselves in right now. We know that combining rapid rehousing with the housing choice voucher works. With the assistance of the Housing Authority's vouchers, our community nearly achieved functional zero for this population in 2017. You may have heard that term elsewhere too. It's when a household presents for services and can be immediately offered a program rather than there being a wait. I'm hopeful that with sustained access to these vouchers, we can get there again as we recover from the pandemic and economic crisis. Fortunately, access to the housing choice vouchers is resumed, and it's expected that this is going to result in exits from rapid rehousing and create openings for families that are currently in motels. This is a really slow process to resume. Many families still need case management support in conducting a housing search, and the units are scarce that will fit in the fair market rents and that will pass an inspection. This process can take months, especially if the household has barriers that'll need an appeal and approval process. And that's an area that case managers provide support as well. That means that right now there's no movement in the rapid rehousing for families currently in motels, and at least not without increased capacity to rapid rehousing program to help starting families towards self-sufficiency. We have more families in motels right now than ever before. And this is why additional rental subsidy and case management supports are needed, so these motel stays can end in safe housing for these families. And with that, I'll turn it over to Debbie Payton from Community Services.
Thanks, Terry. Good afternoon. I'm Debbie Payton, Director of Community Services at Opportunity Council. I'd like to thank you for having us to share and presenting information about housing services for families with children today, alongside our partners in the Whatcom Homeless Service Center, Lydia Place, Housing Authority, and city staff. In addition to what Terry shared about being the management entity for the coordinated entry system for housing, Opportunity Council is a direct service partner agency. And I'm going to share some examples of who we're working with and seeing come through our system for assistance. Over the past several years, we've seen an increase in the need for emergency shelter for families. The primary source for this is motel stays. And since the start of the pandemic and sustained through the winter months, we've seen a sharp, dramatic increase in this need. With added resources, we've been able to serve more families with motel shelter, but at the same time, we've run up against capacity in our programs and case management services that support families with moving on to stable rental housing. So we're currently serving more families than ever in motel shelter, with motel shelter, and for longer. Some of these families include moms with newborn babies coming to us directly from the hospital without anywhere to stay other than a vehicle. We see a lot of families that have been able to stay with family and friends prior to COVID, but now can't stay there for safety and overcrowding or putting someone else's housing at risk for staying too long. Motel shelter does offer a temporary place to stabilize out of crisis while families work on chipping away at any barriers they have to getting into rental housing. And I'll add that during COVID, many families have reported that the relative stability of their motel stay contributed to a successful remote learning environment for their school-aged children, which otherwise would have been extremely disruptive to their learning. Many families work with diversion case management while in shelter. These families are able to identify their own resources and resolve their housing crisis quickly, most often with one-time financial assistance such as application fees and move-in costs. These families may need advocacy with landlords and support with housing search, but they do not enter a longer-term, more costly housing program. For families that we work with that need a deeper level of support, they are most often served with rapid rehousing. Most recently, we provided services for a mom and teenage son who had been living in their car. Staying in the motel first allowed the teen to continue online schooling without issue while they searched for permanent housing. With case management support, they moved into a rental, and mom has been able to return to work and is increasing hours and moving toward exiting the program and paying rent fully on their own. We've also worked with a mom with 2 toddlers who were previously living in a trailer without electricity or running water. Again, that initial motel stay was critical to shift out of crisis, and now have started working with the case manager to start applying for rental units and making a plan for longer-term housing and family stability. And with that, I will turn it over to Lydia Place to continue sharing.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Debbie. And Rochelle Hale will be next with Lydia Place.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rochelle Hale. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a rapid rehousing case manager with the Lydia Place Family Housing Program. And I want to thank everyone for joining in on this conversation. I would like to introduce you all to Jane, our client for discussion today. Her story is the stories compiled without identifying information from our team's interactions with clients to keep confidentiality at the forefront of this discussion today. We hope that through the lens of a Jane Doe client, you can see the need for increased support. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Jane's background. She's fleeing domestic violence, as many of our clients have experienced, and was on a lease with a partner who left damages to her unit. Jane is in a dispute with the landlord over damages and past rental debt, and her abuser controlled the money and thus the rent. She has 1 child with 1 on the way and is expecting to return to a truck. Due to a serious need to get out of the cold and the wet, Jane is placed in a much needed motel. There are significant benefits to this motel stay, some of which being able to quarantine, having access to a refrigerator and microwave, meaning that her food stamps will go farther and last longer. She's able to stay in regular contact with service providers to pursue her housing goals. And most importantly, the motel acts as a safe space for her children. Remember, Jane just had a newborn. Next. Now that Jane is in a hotel, she can focus on finding housing for herself and her 2 children, yet there's a long road ahead. Let's go back to the beginning. Jane is fleeing domestic violence, and the only lease she's ever been on was with her ex-partner, who damaged the property and left a significant amount of rental debt that she's disputing with her landlord. Like many of our clients, Jane has a lack of or negative rental history, debt and low or no credit, and no cosigner. These barriers are very common with many of our clients and perpetuate a cycle of homelessness as resources are not equitably distributed. With the financial support and case management backing of a rapid rehousing program, landlords are more likely to approve Jane for a unit than if she were to search out on her own. This resource is vital for Jane and her family to be able to afford a unit while she's transitioning out of the motel. If you look at the graphic in front of you, you'll see that we have compiled some data based on client barrier levels. You'll see low barrier, medium barrier, and high barrier. Each of those barrier categories affect about 1/3 of our families. Clients with low barriers who are very engaged in the program can expect about 2.5 months from referral to move-in, 2.5 month wait, I should say. And that's for clients who are very engaged in the program. For clients who are medium barrier, maybe with some criminal history or lack of rental history, we're expecting about a 6-month wait to get through from referral to move in. We would place Jane in the medium barrier category. And for those clients with high rental barriers, maybe extensive criminal history or no rental history at all, we're looking at about a 9-month wait from referral in the motel to move in. You may be asking yourself, what does it look like to find housing in the rapid rehousing program based on these numbers? Well, it's important to keep in mind that rapid rehousing is a very successful program, with 80% of the clients we intake exiting into stable housing. From Opportunity Council to Lydia Place to our other partner agencies, we really aim to provide adequate case management services that ensure that our clients' immediate needs are met and that they're given the tools needed to be self-sufficient once they exit the program. Essentially, the rapid rehousing program aims to provide a medium-term rental subsidy with the goal in mind that clients will either, 1, increase income to pay full rent on their own, or 2, get on a Section 8 voucher. With COVID at the forefront of her mind, Jane is put at ease knowing that her case manager is there to assist in her pre-housing, in-housing, and post-housing goals. Jane is resilient, as all of our clients are, and is approved for a unit. After move-in, she continues to work with her case manager on her goals, which includes getting her GED and then moving on to university. She sees this not only as an opportunity to learn, but also as an opportunity to provide her family in the long term. Next. Like mentioned previously, COVID has had a significant impact on clients, but it has also significantly affected the cost of subsidizing housing for a client. 50% of the clients that we serve have fixed or no income and are unable to make progress in the program at this time. Because half of our clients are unable to increase their rental portion, the amount of money being spent on rental subsidy is much higher. Before COVID, Jane may be able to find a job, access childcare, and so forth in order to increase her income and thus her rental portion. Despite COVID, Jane is actively working on a plan with her case manager to increase her income once COVID restrictions are lifted. Yet there's a big blockade here that you've heard from the presenters thus far. We need more rental subsidy dollars to make up the difference in what clients are unable to at this time. Single parents can't move off of TANF, and clients in unemployment are finding it difficult to get back to the work with the economy at its current state. Rapid rehousing is designed to be temporary in nature, with a goal of a 6 to 12 month subsidy. However, rents are getting higher. COVID has created significant barriers for our clients, no childcare, loss of jobs, etc. This has put a financial squeeze on a high percentage of the families that we serve in our system. And as such, families aren't moving through the program as quickly as we'd like. This means slower turnover in the program and a need for us to go deeper into our pockets to provide subsidy. This adds to the backlog of families on our waiting list and makes it extra important that we invest in additional rapid rehousing program capacity right away. Next. There are significant benefits to case management, and case management needs to be expanded as rental subsidy dollars increase. Why? Because case management ensures that clients are given the tools necessary to work towards self-sufficiency after they get off the program. As you can see on the graphic here, there are many barriers that we work with our clients on in order for them to move on to self-sufficiency. Some of that is increasing income through employment, finding and maintaining housing, that's a big one, connecting children to school and childcare, and getting connected to mental and physical health services. The latter has been extremely important with the onset of COVID, and we've worked with many families in getting them connected with services. One of the pain points discussed previously was trust. Trust in the system and trust in case managers to aid in client empowerment. By ensuring that case managers are at the ready when clients move through the system, ready to assist in helping clients reach their goals, we are injecting trust into this system. I wanted to end in talking about the lasting effect that housing families has on the children that we serve. Remember Jane? She has 2 kids, both watching all the while the system works to house them. Leaving children in cars or in tents is something that none of us want, but we can do something. We can proactively increase rental subsidy dollars and expand case management capacity to assist in the system backlog. While children wait in motels, it costs the city more money and it costs the children trauma. The lasting impacts of homelessness on children has been studied, talked about in academic and professional settings, and we're now bringing it to you. I could give you another presentation solely on the effects that lack of stable housing has on children, but I will simply leave you with this. When children experience homelessness and other trauma in their youth, they're more likely to experience homelessness later in life. We have the time now to break that cycle. I want to thank you all for listening and for allowing me to shed light on Jane's reality. This year has been hard for our families, but with additional rapid rehousing support, we can see a dramatic shift in the number of families that we serve. And with the expansion of case management and more money for rental assistance, we can see a real change. And I'll turn it over to our next presenter.
Thank you, Rochelle. We have Tony Caselli here from the Bellingham and Whatcom County Housing Authorities.
Thank you, Samia, and thank you, Rochelle. Again, this is Tony with the Bellingham Housing Authority, and I'd like to thank all city council members, city staff, and everybody else who's joining today's call for asking BHA to participate and share a little bit about what we do here in the community. I'm just going to provide a very brief overview of who we are as an organization and then focus in a little bit more specifically to the topic at hand for today's meeting, that being services and resources for families with children experiencing homelessness. The Bellingham Housing Authority has 3 main lines of business, I would say, and that is public housing, housing choice vouchers, and housing development. As you can see, kind of that 3-legged stool. Looking at public housing briefly, most notably what folks may associate with that is our high rises, Lincoln Square, Washington Square, and Chuckanut Square, primarily for households who are seniors or persons living with disabilities. There are also some units in public housing portfolio that does serve families with children as well. The second line of business, our largest, is the Housing Choice Voucher Program, commonly referred to as the Section 8 program. And that's where the Housing Authority pays a portion of rental assistance on behalf of an eligible family, and we pay that money directly to private market landlords. The Housing Authority infuses over $14 million into the local economy each year just through the Section 8 program by assisting approximately 1,700 households. I will note, as we talk about the Housing Choice Voucher Program, that the number of households we're able to assist is based on the dollar amount that we have. We do have a voucher allocation for 1,744 vouchers, but the number that we can assist fluctuates depending on the cost of the program. And so some people who may have heard me speak before, right now we're assisting approximately 3,500. We were over 3,500 before, and that's not because of a decrease in units. It's just because that per unit cost has increased to the point that we haven't been able to assist as many households as we once were. The Housing Authority is an independent public entity, so we're not associated with we're not under the city or the county or the federal government. And while most of our funding comes from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, otherwise known as HUD, we are not associated with HUD, or we are not HUD. Some folks times will get calls from people trying to reach HUD directly. That's not us. And I'll also go out and say that we're not the authority on all things housing. The last piece that I will talk about that we do here is we are a developer. So we have approximately 1,000 1,000 units, as pointed out there, that have been financed through the low-income housing tax credit program. And so those all affordable to low-income community members. And currently we are working on finishing up for the first phase of our most recent development, which is out there on Samish Way at the former Aloha Motel site. That is who BHA is. I will go out and say also that we're not an emergency housing provider. We recognize that there's significant need within the community in that realm, and that is not where BHA's strong suit is. We're great at providing long-term permanent housing. All of the programs that we do operate and administer are not time limited in any way, and we're also not a service provider. So we really appreciate the collaborations that we have with all of our community partners who can provide some additional pieces to that puzzle while recognizing that what our strength is bringing that subsidy. You can go to the next slide, please. So here I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Housing Authority's specific interventions as it relates to addressing homelessness within the community, noting that not each one of these bullet points is specific to families with children. Looking at the first bullet point here, and the dollar amounts associated with these are either what was spent over the past 12-month period or what's anticipated or projected to be spent over the next 12 months looking forward for some of those newer programs. As we look at the first bullet point, the Bellingham Housing Authority assists 143 households through continuum of care rental assistance. We refer to this locally as Shelter Plus Care. It's a grant that the Housing Authority has been administering for a long time. And we partner with a number of organizations on that. All referrals come through coordinated entry, as Terry had mentioned before, through her team. And that is specific for families who are experiencing chronic homelessness. And when I say families, I don't necessarily mean that the household has children accompanying with them. Most of the folks in that program are single person households, but that's not a requirement of it, just the chronic homeless criteria there. The Housing Authority also has 79 units that we have project-based vouchers. And so that's the acronym PBV that you'll see reiterated throughout this slide here is project-based vouchers. What that means is we take one of those Section 8 vouchers, which is typically attached to a household, but we attach it to a housing unit. And typically it's attached to that unit for a period of 15 years. And then whomever moves into or resides in that unit receives the benefit of that ongoing rental subsidy. They also have the ability to move with continued assistance after the initial 12-month lease period and transfer to a tenant-based rental assistance voucher. Project-based vouchers not only are a great benefit to the tenant household, but also to the development in which they're being placed. In the construction of low-income housing tax credit properties, we know that there's a lot of emphasis on working to serve community members with the lowest income, specifically 30% AMI and under, which is incentivized through the scoring process. In order to do so while also being financially feasible, it's a huge benefit for a property to be able to access project-based vouchers. Unfortunately, we are limited by federal regulation on how many we can attach out of our overall allocation. Here we can see that the Housing Authority has 79 permanent supportive housing units spread out throughout our various properties. It is the Housing Authority's practice to set aside a portion of units in each one of our buildings, or most of our buildings, I should say, that are specific for community members exiting homelessness. We do not operate any buildings that are 100% permanent supportive housing like some of the other projects that you'll see further down the slide. For those 79 permanent supportive housing units, we also contract with Lydia Place, who provides services. That dollar amount there of $175,000, we recognize that does not fully compensate Lydia Place for the resources that they have devoted to providing services, true wraparound services to those households, but that's what the buildings are able to pay for out of the cash flow for those properties. Going down the list, we have 30 project-based vouchers at 22 North, 10 at Citygate, operated by Pioneer Human Services, 8 at Kateri Court, and 8 at Francis Place. Some of those are also VASH vouchers, so that's Veteran Affairs Supportive Housing that we have in each of those buildings specifically for our veteran community members experiencing homelessness. That second to last bullet point was what Terry had alluded to earlier in the presentation that we refer to as local preference vouchers. A few years ago, approximately 3 years ago, the Housing Authority revamped our referral voucher program. And we put out an RFP to local organizations who would be interested in bringing applicants forward and continuing to provide support and services to those applicants after they receive the voucher. Through that process, we have established MOUs with Lydia Place, the Opportunity Council, and Northwest Youth Services. And previously, those organizations were submitting a total of 5 applications per month. We'll talk a little bit about the constraints that 2020 presented later in the presentation. But as we can see here, it was typically 5 per month. We've been able to increase that, thankfully, to address some of the backlog that Terry had also mentioned. So right now we are committed to providing 13 vouchers per month to those 3 different organizations. Again, Opportunity Council, Lydia Place, and Northwest Youth Services. In addition to that, we have been able to work with Northwest Youth Services to address part of the backlog that they've experienced in their rapid rehousing program by providing a one-time increase of 7 new vouchers that they'll be able to issue to their young adults transitioning out of rapid rehousing in the next month or so. The last bullet point, again, as mentioned, is our exciting new project out there on Samish Commons, where we will have 14 units specifically set aside for community members exiting homelessness, and the services there will be provided by Opportunity Council. This is just a small drop of the bucket, but we could see that the Housing Authority, approximately $2.5 million per year, goes towards the support of local community members. I do also just want to note, as we look at this slide and the number of projects here, and express the appreciation to the city of Bellingham for the housing levy. And I recognize that the recent approval of House Bill 1590 that would also contribute additional resources towards the expanded needs of affordable housing and attributed services. So thank you for that ongoing commitment and support of the Housing Authority and the help towards developing more permanent supportive housing and permanent subsidized housing. Next slide, please. As we look more specifically at rental assistance for families with children, we can see that when I looked back at the statistics of who's currently assisted on our voucher program, 32% of the households that are receiving assistance, we have just under 1,700 households currently right now. 32% of those do include families with children. Another 64% that's not represented on this slide are either seniors and or persons living with disabilities. So it's a very small percentage, about 4% of households that neither have minor children nor a disability or a senior household. Of those 32% of households, that includes over 1,100 community members under the age of 18 that have the opportunity for stable housing because of these vouchers. I know Rochelle had alluded to the effect of not having stable housing has on minors. And so we really pride ourselves in being able to say that over 1,000 community members have that opportunity for permanent stable housing because of these vouchers. And as you can look at that second bullet point there, or the next one down, excuse me, the average income for those households is just over $16,000, $16,500. And we know, looking back and talking with Sammy, it sounded like the most recent rent study that the city of Bellingham conducted, a 2-bedroom average within the city was about $1,400 a month. And you could do the math on that, 16,560, and that's under 14,000 or 1,400 a month, excuse me. So without that voucher, a family, even if they were to devote 100% of their income towards housing, would not be able to make ends meet. Again, just pointing to the critical nature that we're able to provide through this long-term and ongoing rental assistance. As we skip down to the second larger bullet point there, the first thing I want to mention before we get into that 21 is going to be a good year is that 2020 was a painful year. I think we can all acknowledge that, and for many reasons. As it relates to the Housing Authority and kind of the halt on those local preference vouchers that had been mentioned previously in today's presentation, we went into what's called a financial shortfall. HUD declared financial shortfall in 2020. And that happened because when the economic impact of the COVID pandemic began to ripple through the community, we were seeing a lot of participants who do have wages through employment. They were starting to get laid off or have their hours cut. As a result, the Housing Authority increases the amount of rental assistance that we can pay to the maximum extent allowable by law. By doing so, our per unit costs just increased exponentially over a very, very short period of time. That threw our budgets into turmoil against the best forecasting that we could have planned for. And so we did have to, probably about June of 2020, we did have to halt issuing any new vouchers, and that included our local preference vouchers. That also had an impact on mobility of people moving from project-based vouchers onto a tenant-based rental assistance, because that also contributes to the expansion of our program. And we were operating from the HUD directive at that point that we could not issue any new vouchers. And so that was a pain point for all of our programs and our partnerships with the community. And I do believe that contributed to the bottleneck that some of the other folks have mentioned on today's presentation. Again, our hope in being able to increase the local preference vouchers this early in 2021 is to alleviate some of that pressure through HUD mainstream voucher program. That's specific for households who have an individual between 18 and 21 living with a disability. So that's also what helped us be able to increase those local preference vouchers available to community members, and that uptick to 13. So currently right now, Opportunity Council and Lydia Place are each bringing forward 6 referrals per month. And one continues for Northwest Youth Services, and those numbers are based on the capacity as that was presented by each organization. Also looking forward, we know that the American Rescue Plan, the most recent round of COVID relief, included approximately $5 billion in emergency housing vouchers. $5 billion sounds like a huge number, but I do want to kind of caution folks that $5 billion needs to last for the life of the program. And so this budget amount is not something that'll be reallocated each year. So depending on how long somebody may benefit from the assistance of a voucher, that money needs to account for. I could estimate, my rough guess is that the Bellingham Housing Authority may receive approximately 50 vouchers through that. We should know by May at the latest, because the legislation did indicate that we would have to be notified within 60 days. Those vouchers are going to be specifically for households who are experiencing homelessness, survivors or fleeing of domestic violence, or at imminent risk of homelessness. So another great resource that we'll be able to bring to the community. Whereas we look back at 2020, things were on hold for so long. We were not able to issue any vouchers to people on our waiting list or local preferences. And here we see a lot more movement in the first part of 2021. The last thing that I'll mention very briefly as we look forward is that last round of congressional appropriations through the budget, not COVID relief package, included a separate line item for what hasn't been officially released yet, but anticipate that they'll be called stability vouchers. And that was funded at about $43 million per year on a federal level through HUD. And those are going to be specifically for households experiencing homelessness, fleeing or survivors of domestic violence, or for veterans. And priority will be given to communities that have an established partnership or strategy with their local continuum of care organization and a demonstrated ability to pair vouchers with services. And so we're hoping that when HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, does release a notice of funding availability, or through whatever process we anticipate that they will make those vouchers available, we anticipate that the Bellingham Housing Authority will be well positioned to hopefully receive some additional vouchers because of our existing collaborations and partnerships with some of the organizations that I've also presented here today. That's what I'll have to say about the Bellingham Housing Authority. I look forward to answering any questions that folks may have after the presentation. At this point, I'll turn it over to Tara.
So I think Samia and Emily will wrap up on this slide, and then I will go after them.
Yes, thank you. I'll turn it over to Emily O'Connor with Lydia Place for a few words.
Hi, everyone. That was an amazing amount of information. Thanks to all of you for listening. Thanks for inviting us. I'd like to maybe just boil it down a little bit. I recognize that our system is complicated, and it's complicated a bit even to those of us who live and breathe this system. But this slide really just re-anchors us in what is it that we're talking about today. And what we're talking about is that we have a waiting list for families with children that has ballooned in this last year. And we have an opportunity in front of us. So I don't think Terry mentioned this, but she often does, which is that at any given time, about 40% of the households on our housing pool are assessed to need rapid rehousing. And rapid rehousing is a really successful strategy. You can see here on the left-hand side of that graph, the success rate for emergency shelter, transitional housing, and rapid rehousing. And Rochelle mentioned this as well. So Whatcom County maintains about an 80%, 78% successful exit rate. So of all of the households that we serve in a rapid rehousing model, roughly 8 in 10 of them exit successfully and stably. The other thing to keep in mind about rapid rehousing is on the right side of this screen. And that is, what does it cost us per successful exit? And so this is not just a great opportunity, and taking care of families with children is not just the right thing to do, it's also the fiscally smart thing to do. So you can see the cost per successful exit on your screen there. When we serve someone in emergency shelter, and we expect them to exit successfully and stably from emergency shelter alone, it costs us about $53,000 to get a successful exit through emergency shelter alone. When we enroll somebody in a rapid rehousing program, it costs us just under $11,000 to get that successful exit. So this is a really effective program, which means we have a really great opportunity to do a lot of good to address that waiting list for families with kids. And I know there's a lot of numbers out there, but I think at the end of the day, we can unite around an understanding that when we take care of our youngest and most vulnerable community members, we will see the impact of that support and intervention for generations to come. So the time for us to invest and to step up is now, before additional trauma is accumulated. It is painful putting all of these families in motels. It's painful because the motel stays aren't our favorite way to respond to unsheltered children and their families. And it's also painful because it's very expensive. What we have right now is a gap. We have a gap in the number of program openings that we have in rapid rehousing. But that also means we have an opportunity to continue to expand a really successful, smart strategy that can help a large percentage of those families who are on the waiting list and get them into that safe and stable housing, and then make sure we can wrap the supports around them for as long as it is needed. We recognize that in COVID, that's going to be a little bit longer than ideally we would like, but that's the reality that we're in right now. And again, that's the opportunity. Some of the voucher pieces that Tony was just talking about, sometimes rapid rehousing can be the bridge that we need, even if folks need more permanent support. Rapid rehousing can be a bridge to some of that support as well. So it's a really flexible, wonderful program that has had significant success for the families with children experiencing homelessness here in our community. And I just want to thank you for digging into all of this information and really thinking about the opportunity that we have in front of us and the importance of investing in healthy children and families here in Whatcom County. Thanks so much for having us today.
Thank you, Emily. And gosh, everybody that helped with the presentation today. This slide here, I'm going to ask Samia to take the slides off, but just to remind Council that we are continuing on with case management and rental assistance as we have in previous years, and you'll see that reflected in our action plan. But what I want to talk to you about today is the $250,000 in general fund. You added this into the 21 budget. And so after today, Samia and I want to get those contracts started. So here's what we're proposing for you. I think you heard loud and clear several times what the roadblocks are right now, okay? And so we can control some of that with money. And the two areas that we need to address are funding for case management. We need to ramp up case management to really impact this system. And that case management needs to have the rental assistance. So Sammy uses this kind of braiding term. We need to braid these resources together. Tony talked to you about those vouchers that are coming online. Whatcom County has received, they refer to it as the Treasury Grant, very large amount of rental assistance dollars coming in for COVID. Then we have $1406. If you recall, the city partnered with the county, and the county's collecting the share for the county. The Housing Advisory Committee has already made the recommendation to set aside 60% of the revenue for rental assistance focused on families with children. So that step's been made. We've got federal funding coming in to assist with COVID. And the strategy on rental assistance is going to be use 1406 to get those families out of motels and into a housing. And once they're in to that housing, those Treasury dollars come into play. Okay, so we figured that piece of the system out. The county has some additional funds this year. They refer to them as ESG dollars. I think that means emergency shelter grant. I'm looking at Samia. And those dollars can be used for case management. And so, but they're projecting that next year they won't have as many dollars. So if you can tell, Sammy and I work behind the scenes a lot with our partners, not only the agency partners, but also Whatcom County, to move funds around. And we have to be able to do that. And what's so great about the general fund is it is the most flexible resource out there. Most of these funds that are coming into our community, typically from the federal government, have a lot of restrictions associated with them. I think I mentioned at your last meeting that HUD caps us at $2,500 for administration per contract. It doesn't matter how much, it goes up. So those are real restrictions. So what we plan to do is between the county and the city funds, we're going to add 4 case managers for families with children. That's 4. And that's going to be able to assist on an average, like a 12-month time frame, 75 additional households. This is in addition to what we were serving, the 12 months before. They're estimating, and this could kind of swing a little bit, but between 50 and 65 of those are coming from those motels. So we need to get case management into those families that are in motels so that they can get from that point into rapid rehousing and out of rapid rehousing. We've talked, both the OC and Lydia Place, and you see the Housing Authority's role. They are the 2 agencies that are predominantly serving families with children in our community. In this case, the OC has quite adequate resources coming in from the county and other sources. So our contract is going to be focused with Lydia Place, and it's going to be focused, I think what you can tell, on staffing. So we're going to be able to come in with our general fund and provide staffing while we use the county's funds for rental assistance. So it's actually, we feel pretty good about this proposal. I will tell you that Sammy and I will remain flexible, because as new dollars come and go out of our community, we need to be. But today we're seeking your direction to go ahead and just tell us, yes, focus on families with children, and we will begin that work right away. We know that Lydia Place has already started working on the staffing hiring side. And with that, Council, thank you for so much of your time today. I'm sure that all of our presenters would be happy to address any questions that you might have or listen to any comments that you have.
Thank you very much. As Emily said, yes, a wealth of information in a very succinct manner and short period of time. So I tried to allow for sufficient time for questions this afternoon. So we will start with Council Member Anderson.
Thank you, President Stone. I really want to thank all of the agencies for everything you contribute to our community and for the great work that you do. This was a wonderful presentation that I hope the city will be able to put some of those slides on our webpage so that we can refer to that to community members to be able to really show the partnership and the work that we're doing. I also want to support your priorities that you've listed here. I think family with children, I think it's just essential that we do focus some of our additional resources to be able to assist them. And it was very helpful to understand where the bottleneck is. And I do think that staffing is hugely important as we're looking at more people to serve. We need to be able to have the staffing levels to be able to provide that service, because without that, truly it doesn't matter how many vouchers we have if we cannot do the wraparound services to be able to assist these individuals. it doesn't get us where we need to go. Kind of a question. So have we identified how much funding will be coming out of this nearly $1 trillion package coming from the government for COVID, and how some of these contracts, if something is able to shift, how we'll be able to utilize those, hopefully those funds that will be coming our way to be able to, I assume that it's limited, that we would not be able to pay for staffing with it. Just a little more information, how we might be able to unclog this bottleneck a little bit better.
Are you speaking about the funds that will come directly to the city of Bellingham or directly to Whatcom County, that particular sort? Yeah.
I'm assuming that there will be money coming eventually from the federal government, because there's information in that bill package that is supposed to go to rental assistance in order to prevent people from becoming homeless. I'm hoping we're going to be able to use that funding also for people who are homeless. You would probably know better than me at this point. I know last time when we received funding, we entered more of a partnership with the county, with the funding the city got and the county got, and then decided how to distribute it. I'm assuming that decision hasn't been made, so I don't want to necessarily say just the city funds. I'm hoping if it's in everyone's best interest, we partner again in order to address the whole community needs.
So first of all, there's been a lot of different funding from the federal government to different, either to the state, and then it goes like through the Department of Commerce. But what we're trying to get a feel for, first of all, we know that we're getting the Opportunity Council is getting about 16 million, I think it is, in rental assistance. Okay. That's a lot of rental assistance. That is a lot of staff time, and that is going to be a lot of their focus. But in addition to that, so with the last CARES Act, we partnered with the county. I can't imagine that we wouldn't do that again. We're already talking with county health department staff about it, as well as staff, the administration. I think that there's an internal team that Brian is leading that will be presenting, I think, some recommendations, but what we're trying to get a handle on is how can we use, we think there are funding, it's about $21 million, but there hasn't been a lot of clarity on how we can use the funds. And then we also need to keep an eye on what program areas are being adequately covered by different direct sources. So for example, rental assistance or childcare. There's a lot of childcare money coming in. So we've got some research to do on where the needs are, but where are the real gaps? That's all I can say. I think there's going to be a lot more information in the next couple of weeks.
Councilmember Lillquist and then Hamel.
I'll do a couple of short things and maybe ask to be recognized again. First, just to follow on what Lisa was asking about and what you were saying, Tara, another big pot of money coming to our community will be for a food aid and for, support that might go to the food bank. And so that's an area maybe where I've been talking to Mike Cohen. The city won't need to help out the food bank because they'll get direct aid through the rescues plan, but we should consider that that's one of the many uses we could supplement if it isn't handled better directly. This is a really particular question. Emily, you showed that one set of graphs that had to do with the cost for successful exit and unsuccessful exits for emergency housing versus rapid rehousing. And you pointed to the top two graphs. However, if I look at the bottom right graph for the state, it seems to tell a completely different story, that the cost for exit for rapid rehousing wasn't much less than the cost for successful entry for emergency housing. And those numbers are quite different from our local numbers. Can you speak to that those statewide numbers don't tell the same story, or do they?
Well, I could take a I can add some context. I can't speak for I don't know all of the program components across the state that go into this average. But what I can say is when we put somebody in emergency shelter and it doesn't also enroll them into a housing program that has housing and services, they then don't have the support they need to move out of that system, especially in a place like Whatcom County where housing is really tight and really expensive, right? And so when we put somebody in emergency shelter here in Whatcom County, we can't expect them to then just magically rehouse themselves when they don't have resources or subsidies or support to be able to do that. And so in Whatcom County, if you're in emergency shelter, you aren't also enrolled into a housing program necessarily you would move to rapid rehousing or move to permanent supportive housing to show up on this exit graph. So I don't know if that makes sense, but if you have emergency shelter programs that also include case management and a housing piece, then you're going to see emergency shelter be more effective. That meaning for people to go from the emergency shelter to permanent housing. Right. So if you want somebody to go from emergency shelter to permanent housing in Whatcom County, it costs $53,000. But if you had a more robust services component in the emergency shelter, you might see cheaper exits straight from emergency shelter to permanent housing. Does that make sense at all?
I think what you're suggesting is that in the state numbers, there's a blur in the program type and different levels of service that are being lumped into the same category, the same column on the graph. But in the Whatcom County numbers, the rapid rehousing really is kind of a different creature with a different level of support than the emergency shelter portion. And because those are cleaner and more distinguished locally, the outcomes and the cost effectiveness is easier to discern. Am I putting words in your mouth, or if I got it?
No, that is correct. So if the emergency shelter has robust services with it, you'll see lower exit costs, right? And
because
if the emergency shelter is
similar to rapid rehousing, then.
Right. If the emergency shelter is just a segue to a rapid rehousing program, or is just the emergency shelter facility on its own, without the housing search assistance and deposit assistance and rental assistance, then it's going to be more expensive to get people directly from there into housing. But these, I can't speak to the whole breadth of services across the state. Maybe Samia has to.
And one example before Samia jumps in, the Garden View tiny home village that the city is funding, that's one of the reasons why the staff wanted to ensure that we had case management that went along with that emergency shelter. So there will be a full-time case manager helping those residents do exactly what Emily's case managers are going to be doing with families staying at motels. Same type of service. So hopefully that exit will be, which is different than what's happening at base camp. Samia, you were raising your hand.
I just wanted to point out that we have county staff here too. Ann Beck with the county is on, and Terry Bryant with the Homeless Service Center, both of whom work extensively with the HMIS system, the Homeless Management Information System, from which this data comes. So just wanted to let them have an opportunity if they wanted to respond.
I'll just say Terry's probably best for this. I haven't used HMIS since I was a case manager, so I'm not as close to that information. So Terry, go ahead.
Thanks, Ann. I think one reason that it looks so much more expensive in our community is because we're using motels as a shelter. That's an expensive intervention. It's more expensive than rapid rehousing. That's one big reason. And the other thing that is a contributing factor is that not all emergency shelters use HMIS, and that's explicitly the data system where that comes from on that slide that Emily was using. However, going forward, the Lighthouse mission is using HMIS for base camp. So I think we're going to see a shift again, probably next year, in what those costs per household look like for that reason. That's all I had to say.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to Councilmember Hamel.
Thank you, Council President Stone, and thanks for the presenters not just for coming today and providing this wealth of information, but just for the work that you all do every day on behalf of our community's most vulnerable people. So thank you. So there's a number of different things going on here. Sorry, it's a notification going off. A number of different things going on. When I first started in 2015, the vacancy rate was around 0.5%. It was around 1%. It was dropping to about 0.5%. Now it's about 3% for rentals. What I was hopeful in that increase was that we would see just expansion of capacity that would help us address some of the issues around housing inventory, but it looks like it's not really, there's not a commensurate like parallel line tracking. More inventory means less people experiencing homelessness. It doesn't appear that that's presenting itself. Pardon me. And so we can't really control that one. We can control, however, or we can influence workforce gaps, and that's, I think, what we're talking, to some degree here today, and that's case management. We know that some folks need that extra help and those wraparound services so that they can be successful in housing. And addressing the childhood trauma, I'm glad people brought that up today. That's a big deal. I'm serve on the board of domestic violence and sexual assault services, and we hear stories from our staff about kids who are staying with mom in a hotel, fleeing, or motel, and those long term, it's just not good for the child. They need to be in a stable home, and we need to have local control. We need to have dollars that we can control that don't have a lot of criteria attached to them, like the Fed dollars. We have to have those dollars as well, but we need more of the local control. And we heard, I think it was from Tony, that the pandemic, the overlay of the pandemic was just, it really has it's hurt a lot of people. And so I think that we need to we need to fine tune our investments here a little bit to address that. So if I'm reading this correctly, the staff is asking for additional $250,000 from the general fund that would assist in relieving a portion of the bottlenecks that were presented here today. I have that correct, right? You're seeking a motion?
Just direction. You've provided budget authority, but when you did that, there wasn't a specific program or project. So we went away, did our research, and this is our proposal. So I'm not asking for more money, just that we focus on families with children.
Right. So it's an alignment. It's taking the dollars and it's aligning them to the right.
Yes.
What you see is, okay, great. Excellent. Okay. I'm supportive of that. I think that that's a good idea. I mean, it just makes sense in so many different ways. Like, I think Councilmember Anderson brought up some pieces on the childhood trauma. I serve as the behavioral health chair for the incarceration, for the county's incarceration prevention and reduction task force. And we know that childhood trauma contributes to later involvement with criminal justice system. And if you didn't have that, it would be lesser. So it's not just the apparent cost of, like an exit cost or some of those things. There are these downstream effects that happen over a person's lifetime. So I'm just really supportive of any intervention. I mean, today we authorized the We Grow. I think that things like that are all those little pieces. It's many intersections of lots of different concepts, ideas, and actions that will help us in our efforts here. So I'm very supportive.
Did other council members have questions before I go back to Councilmember Lilquist? Councilmember Huffman.
Thank you. First of all, thanks so much to everybody that helped with this presentation. I think if you learn anything at all from this presentation, it's how complicated this system is, and then layer over the top of that the finances of it, and it's pretty mind-blowing that anybody can keep track of how this works. But I have a specific question. I'm wondering if Rochelle has left us. This is something that she talked about, but maybe Terry or Emily can answer to this. I'm interested in learning more about the slide, the rapid rehousing client move-in timeline slide, the 3 different tiers of barriers, and that higher tier where it's taking an average of 9 months to find housing for those folks. It's a long time, especially if there are children involved. That's an entire school year. And I'm wondering, what are the biggest barriers? Like maybe the top 2 barriers that that are seen with those folks at the 9-month time period? And then also, are those people in hotels during that 9 months, or where are those folks staying?
Rochelle has left us to get back to her case management duties. So yes, they are. If the children were unsheltered at entrance, then hopefully they would be placed in a motel. Though we're currently at a capacity issue there with unsheltered children and families in our system. And then if the children, sometimes what happens is the children, and this is important from a child trauma perspective, if the children are sheltered, but the parents are unsheltered, our system doesn't reunite them and put them in a motel. It's not because we don't want to, it's because we don't have enough money. So if you can then imagine, not only are you experiencing homelessness, but you're also experiencing the trauma of separation, Rowie, shush, from your caregivers. That's an additional trauma, and then extended if they are a high barrier household. So to answer the second part of your question, Rochelle had a couple of examples on there. So criminal history or like bad credit, bad rental history. Those can be things that make it really hard to find a landlord who's willing to rent. And so it can take quite a bit of work to find housing or a landlord that's willing to rent to the family. But it's very helpful when we can say, look, we an organization, a reputable organization, we're behind this family. We're going to pay their rent. Here's our guarantee. Here's our services. And so that is a huge value to helping even high barrier families get into housing, is to have programs be able to stand behind them. It's a benefit to the landlord as well. But of course, these are like 9 months is really, really challenging and super expensive if we're keeping them in a motel for all of that period of time. Thanks for your question.
Samia, did you have a follow-up?
I just wanted to remind Council about the presentation given last October, just an overview about people experiencing homelessness. And there was a slide there about more than just a roof being needed, and it goes into detail about a lot of the barriers that folks have, and that about 50% of those on the housing pool have 2 or more barriers in a single household.
Thank you for that reminder, Samia, and for the public, those meetings are available online as well if people want to go back and watch that presentation from October. Councilmember Knudsen.
Yes, I want to echo everything that everybody said today. To have all these organizations here today, and I've never been a fan of a lot of slideshows, but this is a very important slideshow, and I wish more people were able to see it. Hopefully they can. What you people do every single hour of every day doesn't make the headlines. It's not in the newspaper. It's not on the radio. It's your everyday work. And where would this community be if we didn't have all these organizations that are working with us, and our staff too, working behind the scenes on all this? So I want to thank you for all your work, and hopefully we'll get to the day when we won't need a waiting list anymore. That's a lofty goal that we need to achieve. Thank you.
Councilmember Lillquist.
Well, first going off what Jean just said, I think this ought to be in the newspaper, right? What is the newspaper is people's agitation and concerns over the fact there are people who are visibly homeless. And so the newspaper, I think, needs to cover the entire system, which is aimed at addressing homelessness before it happens or after it happens, not just during the moment of homelessness. What we're talking about here are systems that operate over years and months, and rather than in one day or 1 week. And that's why they're effective, though, because they're systems. So I think it should be in the news. So I'm going to play the skeptic. When the council put this into the budget, we actually talked about it being used in 2 ways, and one of those is not being talked about here. We talked specifically about expanding outreach services, and then also about the allied services that that are in the system that someone would then enter. And it seems like this proposal does the second part, but not the first. You're suggesting that we increase the service level. Well, once someone enters the system, the critical component there is the case management to move them through the system and on to success. But you decided in your proposal to ignore the first part of the conversation that the city council had. And I remember Ms. Vargas and I spoke to this in particular, which was the outreach services. I kind of want to hear from Ms. Bryant, but also from the staff, but why is it you felt it was okay to not increase funding to the outreach component of the system?
I'll start and then Terry can jump in there, because it was a conversation that we had between my staff and Terry's, as well as a conversation that I had with Greg Winter. One of the challenges that we have right now that you guys are seeing is we've got to move people through the system. We don't have anything for outreach workers. Well, not anything for them to do. There's plenty to do, but we don't have anywhere to put people. So it doesn't mean that we don't think that there will be a day where it makes sense again to shift resources and maybe move some resources into outreach, but we don't think that day is today. We think today we've got to focus on the case management to get people through. We've got families coming in right now to the OC on a really outrageous, I think it's 5 per week or something like that. That is not even having an outreach worker out there looking for them. Terry, do you want to, because these are under her, the HOT team is under Terry's program as well.
Sure. From the HOT team's perspective, they would love to expand and do even more work. But from a systemic perspective, that comes at the expense of not being able to move families out of motels into a housing program. And it's been a super challenge, and Debbie can speak to this too, because her staff does a ton of the coordinated entry work, both in doing those intakes into the system, but also facilitating these motel stays. And I know that she's been stretched to the max, staff have been stretched to the max, and it's just a matter of, do we want families to lose their motel stay because we're funding outreach, or do we want families to go into rapid rehousing that's funded with this money? So I think that's kind of the intent and the agreement that we had in discussions.
First, I guess before I go to Councilmember Anderson, Debbie, I don't know if you had something you wanted to add in response.
Oh, I would just echo what I've heard. The most critical and essential need for moving families into stable housing and out of motels is the case management at this point.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Lilliquist, for pointing out that when we did vote to take money from the general fund, it was for one of 2 services. And thankfully, we did leave it up to the city to be able to come back later to let us know what the higher need is. But we don't want to forget that outreach and providing those services basically on the street are critically important. I completely agree with staff and agencies that in order to be able to work with people who are currently homeless, we need to have a place to be able to move them to. And with this bottleneck, we need to clear that to create these opportunities. I also wanted to remind the public, whether it was a popular decision or not, but council did vote to increase that taxation, the 1 cent on the $10 or however that worked. It was like a penny on the $10 expenditure. But part of that is we'll be hopefully being able to generate an additional $3 million. And I know that there are some limitations to how that funding, based on what the state had set up, can be spent. Part of it was, for me, was to be able to provide some of the mental health services and support, but hopefully we'll be able to utilize some of that other funding to be able to do some of the outreach work, which I think would definitely be supporting with the mental health component. So let's hope that when those funding dollars start being given into the city budget, hopefully in the next month or two, we'll have more information coming from Tara, staff, and agencies on how best to spend that funding in order to be able to help individuals who are homeless. So again, thanks Councilmember Lilquist for that reminder as to the importance of that funding we approved. But again, I do support, as staff have presented, I think they're in the best position to really say through their analysis where this funding is going to have the best impact.
Councilmember Hamel.
Right. So the county tomorrow will be having a public hearing on 1590, if I'm correct, for their portion of it. That's an additional $2 million on top of the $3 million. We vote tonight, third and final on that one. So if that all goes through, that's $5 million. Up to 40% can be used for housing related services that are mental health or behavioral health oriented. So that's good. I think that'll be additional. My question for the staff is, what do we know about the county's EDI, economic development incentive dollars, and then the REIT, real estate excise tax? Like the county executive came and visited us a couple weeks ago and brought those funds up specifically, and it would be nice to just to better understand kind of the funding in its totality. So and if you don't have the answer right now, that's fine, but I do want to know that I looked at our schedule for the next couple of meetings. I didn't see those listed. I
am not aware of any actions taken on EDI or the REIT. Ann Beck could jump on if she has, or we can get back to you.
I can talk to you about vaccines right now, is where I'm at. So I apologize. That's the area that I'm the least familiar with when it comes to housing and everything else.
We will ask the administration for an update if you'd like.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lilquist.
Yeah, I'm as I read House Bill 1590, I got up in front of me. It is available for housing related services, the up to 40% component. And so I guess I would just make a plea that if we find that the city and the county can fund an adequate level of case management out of the 1590 monies, that we again turn to these highly flexible general fund dollars and potentially invigorate outreach at some future date. It's one of the components. I would like us to keep open the idea that we might want to, that we should increase that component too, if we could remove the other bottlenecks. And then finally, I noted that the county just finished their point in time count for homelessness, and that report is out now. I think it might be nice at a future date just to make that a short committee of the whole report item. Top level hitting on there. I mean, the first thing I noticed is that homelessness is not really getting worse, but it's really not getting better. You know, we're really treading water rather than making progress. Anyway, I'm asking if the council agrees we should request a brief agenda item on the point in time count for homelessness.
Sounds good.
Looks like thumbs up. Other questions or comments from council members? Councilmember Hamel.
Hey, sorry to be so chatty. I had a question for Terry Bryant. I was taking some notes when you said there was a 44% increase since the pandemic, and I didn't get what that specific increase was. What was that?
That's actually active applications within the coordinated entry system. So the number of families waiting for a housing program is increased by that amount.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Ann?
I just wanted to jump on really quickly. I feel like I've come on to just tell people I'm going to defer to somebody else to answer things. But part of that really is this group of folks work so well together, all of our partners providing the services in the community, as well as the city and county. We meet really regularly to talk about the best way to utilize all of the funding. We don't want to ever have to send any funding back for any of the programs. And so much of the funding has different strings attached to it. So we're always trying to figure out the best way to fit it in. So just, I know you know it, and I know it's been said here, but this group of folks, they study these things, they study all the evidence-based programs, they know their stuff, and they continue to develop and figure out what the next best way to serve this community is. So that's why I continue to defer, because there's a lot of really smart people doing this work who are really committed to making a difference in this community.
Mayor Fleetwood.
Well, first off, ditto to what Ann just said, agreed. Following up on Councilmember Hamill's question for Terry Bryant, the 44% increase in applications over the last year constitutes approximately how many individual new applications?
I can tell you how many families right this minute are waiting for housing. Okay, right now in the housing pool, there are 135 active applications for families with children waiting for a housing placement.
So a 44% increase we could deduce would mean that last year's total at this point in time, we would have been around what? I can't do the math quickly enough, but 50 or 60. Anyway, yes. Way up. Okay, thank you very much, Terry.
Any other questions or comments from council or from presenters today? Okay. I want to thank everybody for your time, and as many other council members have mentioned, just your commitment to this work and the heavy lifts that you all take on every day, day in and day out. And just a plea to staff, I guess it's already been articulated by other council members, but just the continued flexibility as new dollars come in to revisit these issues, to make sure that we're being as effective and impactful as possible with the limited resources that we have, as that's a continually changing landscape. So thank you for that.
Councilmember Stone, I just want to ask real quick, Peter Raffato, if the council needs to provide an actual vote on direction. I feel like I have it. It's in the budget, but I did ask for council direction. Should we ask for them to vote?
If you feel like you don't have full clarity, something along the lines of a motion to approve the general approach as presented by staff may be helpful. You may find that helpful.
If you don't mind, it would just be helpful for me. And I'm hearing you about full flexibility. We want to be that way. So we'll come back if it isn't going to be used in this way to support families with children. We'll be back.
Okay. Do we have a motion to move forward with the direction as provided by staff?
Second.
I missed the first.
Oh, I'll make the motion. Nobody. I was behind myself. I'll move the motion.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made by Councilmember Knudsen, second by Councilmember Anderson. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, that passes 6-0 with one excused. Okay. Okay, then moving forward this afternoon, we have a set of minutes for approval from our March 8th committee meetings.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion's been made by Councilmember Knudsen, a second by Councilmember Lillquist. Any changes or corrections? Seeing none, all in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Councilmember Lillquist?
Sorry, I was just voting with my hand because I couldn't unmute in time.
No worries. And seeing none opposed, that passes 6-0 with one excused. Old and new business. Mayor Fleetwood.
I believe some of the council members have requested just a brief update on the status of efforts around Jerry Field and the disencampment there, and the fact, as we all know, the move over to Laurel. We remain actively committed to ending the encampment at Laurel Park. I think you know that when Jerry Field, when that effort began actively last week, there was movement towards Laurel Park. There was an effort to end that. A lot of people left. Some people came back. And I just wanted to let Eric Johnston give a brief overview of what happened with Jerry Field, and also hear from Brian Heinrich, our deputy administrator, on some of the actions that also took place last week. So if we could start with Eric Johnston, our Public Works Director, if that's all right with you, Council President Stone.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Fleetwood. Director Johnston.
Thank you. Just to be very relatively brief, as we have mentioned a couple of times with the council over the last couple of weeks, we are doing our best to strive to follow the standard process for dealing with camps that are reported to us by members of the community. It's been noted several times that we have many dozens of camps that are located throughout the community that the city is aware of, that have been reached out and contacted to by various service groups that you heard about this afternoon, including the HOT team. But from time to time, there are encampments that do need to be, as the mayor puts it, disencamped or cleaned up. Jared Field was one of those camps. And so that camp had been posted at least twice, once in early February, and we delayed the cleanup of that camp because of the pending very cold weather and opened the cold weather shelter for a period of time. But last week we did need to proceed forward with the cleanup at Jerry Field. And so on Tuesday morning, the Public Works Department and the Parks Department, as a joint effort, mobilized a couple of crews early in the morning, about 7:45, 8 o'clock. And the first course of business was a couple of senior staff members, myself included, walked onto the site and wanted to make sure that it was safe for staff to proceed. And I mention that because we have at City Hall met with some resistance from members of the Bellingham Occupy protest or the mutual aid group who have opposed efforts to clean up those park facilities. We were not met with any resistance. We were not met, well, I shouldn't say with any resistance. We were not met with, we were able to proceed forward and proceed our work. So we called the crews up and they started to do the work. They did start with sites that had not had many people in them for a period of time and did allow for members of the community, including members of BOP, to come in and to move campers out of Jerry Field. We were careful, slow, and deliberate. We proceeded with caution. Wherever possible, we talked to campers individually. In many cases, we were not allowed to talk to campers because we were somewhat blocked by protesters. Some of the campers left and told us to clean up their stuff, and so we did. We were able to recover some salvageable property, so stuff that was clean, not soiled, did not have the presence of needles, and some of those personal property items were stored. We did take those offsite. Much of the material that we saw at Jerry Field was soiled, damaged, moldy, was not salvageable and could not be stored safely. In total, we removed about 240 cubic yards of waste from that site. That's about 220 F-150 pickup trucks. And I'll mention then, this is not a criticism on the people living there by any stretch of the imagination. It's just a fact, if you will. That's the equivalent of about 550 people over the same period of time. So if I were to take a single family home, assuming about 3 people over a 6-week period and project that out, the equivalent number of people would be about 550. So there is an extraordinary amount of waste that was created of things that were not salvageable at this particular encampment. Many of the things that we were unfortunately needing to place in the waste disposal containers were unused clothing items still in their packages that had been left out to get wet. Food items, multiple large dogs of bag food is one example. Large bags of dog food, excuse me, that had unfortunately been allowed to spoil. Clearly, the conditions there were less than sanitary for anyone, let alone the people who were living at that location. So a very large amount of debris that was needed to be removed that could not be salvageable. And one would ask, well, where did that material come from? And a lot of that material, I have to assume, and maybe this is more commentary than fact, but was brought by donations. And I think we would, as staff, very much would prefer that those donations go to the existing service provider so that they could be stored and put to greater use rather than to these illegal encampments within city parks. And in any case, the city staff was on board, was on scene from about 8 a.m. till about 2 to 3 p.m. Costs incurred by the Parks and the Public Works Department were about $27,000 for the day's efforts. That includes labor and equipment and materials. We have not yet got the full costs yet from SSE for the disposal of that 240 yards of material, but all things considered, it was a relatively it was a good day's work for our public works crew to be out there. Not a very pleasant environment. Certainly, none of us want to be involved with having to tell a person who's experiencing homeless that they need to leave today. But we did make clear that there were opportunities available at the Lighthouse Mission at the base camp facility. The base camp providers were on site during that day for at least a short period of time. Many of the people who we talked to said they did not want to go to base camp or were under the impression that they could not go there. I would like to mention particularly that our crews did exceptionally well. They presented themselves with professionalism. They were calm and they were patient, and they did their work with efficiency that we would expect of public employees. And I appreciate that, and I enjoy working with them both on the Parks and the Public Works side of the house. We know that as they were leaving Jerry Field, they went over to Laurel Park. And later in that afternoon, anticipating that was going to happen, we were prepared to post that site. And so on Tuesday afternoon, as the camp cleanup at Jerry Field was proceeding, we had other crews who posted Jerry Field and put a date on there for Friday morning last week. I think that's it for Jerry Field, and probably turn to Brian for recap of Friday.
Sure. Thank you, Eric. Good afternoon. So as Eric said, we did post Laurel Park around 2:30 on Tuesday afternoon, and on Friday morning, a small number of us arrived at the park and were met by a small but fairly vocal group of folks, as Eric mentioned, likely affiliated with the Bellingham Occupy protest. What was interesting is that within minutes of our arrival, that many of the campers began to pack up their belongings on their own, and they did begin to leave Laurel Park on their own. And by that afternoon, the park was nearly empty. During the course of the day, some folks who had organized previous protests brought their vehicles and loaded up a large number of belongings. You might be aware that they tried to establish other illegal camps maritime at the Lincoln Creek Transportation Center. They were deterred from doing so. And over the course of the weekend, they did return with those vehicles and the belongings. I think you'll find if you went by Laurel Park today, there are a large number of belongings, not very many campers per se, but there's a number of piles of hard to say what they might be, perhaps tents, tables, etc. Those are there today. Crews did return on Saturday morning to continue with the cleanup, but were deterred. And so we have, over the course of this, as Eric mentioned, with our Jerry Field approach, we've asked our staff to be non-confrontational. They're very professional. They are non-confrontational, and when we're faced with that, we do pull back. And so we're establishing what our next steps are currently. But that's where we're at today.
If I could mention one other thing about the amount of material we had to remove from Jerry Field, it was of interest to me, or note to me, that when we arrived there, the dumpster that had been provided was empty. So the dumpster that we had provided that was emptied by SSE on a regular basis, that particular morning, there was nothing in that small dumpster. Nor was there anything in the 40-yard dumpster that had been delivered the day before. So the argument is that the reason there was so much waste and garbage at Jerry Field was because the city wasn't providing dumpsters. Kind of falls apart because the facilities that were provided were not being used as efficiently and effectively as could have been. And that was similar to what we also saw at City Hall. And so when questions are asked of us, why is the city not providing dumpsters? One is that we do not provide dumpsters or other facilities for illegal use of the city parks. And two, when those facilities were provided, both at City Hall and then at Jerry Field, they are not appropriately used. And so it's unfortunate that we find ourselves in a position to have to hold that position, but that's where we are currently at.
Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you for recognizing me. First, thank you to the city and especially our parks and public works staff. It is a lot for us to ask them to go on site to a protest that can be quite confrontational. And I didn't know that staff had gone there on Saturday morning and was met with resistance from the protesters. So if you can extend my personal thanks to those staff members. Again, it's just something that is very difficult to put our city staff in that position. I have heard from a lot of residents around Laurel Park, and they're terrified. There's a lot of noise at night. Saturday morning, they woke up to dozens of pallets circling the park that one would assume was put there in order to create a protest resistance should the police show up. There's expectations that even though they have expressed a lot of compassion and, past support and current support towards homeless services, that this is basically a hostile takeover of the park by protesters and the collective. And unfortunately, some of our homeless community members are kind of wrapped up with that. So I do hope at some point the park can be returned so that other community members can safely use it. I've heard from people who do not feel safe going there because of harassment. And some people are feeling as though they're basically in a hostage situation and they don't feel safe leaving their homes, even to walk around there because of being confronted. And I know that the city staff and police are well aware of that, but I don't know if the community is well aware of that. This is not an isolated area. It's not a protest downtown. This is in a residential neighborhood where people are literally feet from this location. And when you have people who are using their hoses or their bushes for various business, and residents come out and say, please don't do that, and then they are confronted in a way that is inappropriate, that makes them feel jeopardized and unsafe. This is not tenable. We heard multiple times all the services that we are funding and putting together to assist the people who are without shelter. And yes, we cannot provide shelter to everyone's preference, but there is available beds. And this has to end. And I just trust that the city is looking at how this will be addressed and that we will not be talking about our neighbors' safety 2 months from now, as far as the way things had kind of elongated at City Hall and Jerry Field. And I know people are resistant to speak up because of the collective's harassment and doxing. I mean, there's been things on social media where council members' pictures of their homes have been posted along with their address and a call for protesters to go to their homes and make them uncomfortable. And I think it's important for the community to realize this and hear this, that this is a protest. And it is, there is an organization who is really targeting members of our community who speak up, who they're targeting council, they're targeting the mayor. I want to share that when my husband and I stood in front of Seth's house, when this protest went to go protest in front of his house, my husband was assaulted. Someone took a pole and smacked him up the center of the head for standing there. And we did file, he just recently filed a report on that. And he hesitated to do that because of fear of my safety. He didn't want to report it because his wife is a council member and he was afraid it would put a target on our house and it would put a target on me. But I think it's really important for the community to understand, you know, to stand in solidarity and say, we support your right to protest, but not to target our mayor's house and vandalize. My husband was hit with a stick in the middle of the head for standing there, and this is not okay. So this has to end. I mean, I know people are going to come at me and say things, but this is not right. And this is not helping the people who are unsheltered, who are at that park. To be able to stand between them and services and outreach is wrong. To use people for a protest is wrong. So I'm just exposing it so that people are fully aware of what has been happening and make that part of the public record.
Thank you, Councilmember Anderson. Mayor Fleetwood,
Well, just a response. Councilmember Anderson expressed concern that the camp that has been started at Laurel Park might continue for a long duration. And I just want to express to you that that's not going to happen. I think you realize, for a lot of obvious reasons, we don't go into particular detail about aspects of an operation, but it will be coming to an end. And that's appropriate for many of the reasons that you described. This community cares very much about issues of homelessness. The last 2 hours in the presentation that was given by so many different service providers and our own staff is a testament to that. And the amount of money that this community has supported paying locally to address this issue is testament to that. You all made a decision to uphold our Bellingham Municipal Code, which has prohibitions against camping in public parks. Public parks are for everybody. And that's what we're enforcing in this case. There are a variety of places that people can go. We continue dedicated to building increased capacity in this respect. We all know about Lehigh and Road to Home that we're working to put up this spring. And I'm delighted to say that we're now at spring. Base Camp still has room for many people. We recognize the concerns that critics of our emphasis on that say. There are some people that can't go there. It's not right for everybody. We acknowledge that. There's also a lot of overstatement expressed by people when they overstate how many people can't get in there. Base Camp, the people at Lighthouse Mission have continuously said that that's overstated, and that in fact there's a process for reentry for most people there. And let's not forget that, and this is by no means a suggestion for any kind of ultimate solution, it's not, but it's important to remember that there were over 100 tiny encampments throughout our community that existed before November 11th, when the protest at City Hall began, that we did not enforce against. So I think that those things need to be made clear. But to your point, Councilmember Anderson, the Laurel Park tent encampment is going to be ended.
Councilmember Lillquist.
Kind of following on the nature of those last two comments. I wish that we could kind of go to the points where we actually, I think, almost everyone in the community agrees, which is sympathy for people who are experiencing homelessness and a willingness to commit public resources to helping out with especially long-term solutions to getting people back into permanent and stable housing, but also short-term stopgap sheltering. But instead, what we're dealing with is protests that the energy is being expended not on solutions, but on dealing with protests that I think are misinformed, misguided, misdirected, and counterproductive. They're ineffective. And they're ineffective because they're ignoring the essential truth, which is that this community cares and devotes millions of dollars every year and is helping out hundreds of people at this very moment in hundreds, multiple plural, in a variety of ways, in many different programs that are involved in securing stable, independent, dignified housing. And to ignore that entire iceberg and focus on this difficult tip, those who remain unsheltered, is to miss the bigger picture. And that's why those voices of protest will never be persuasive, because they're not focusing on the solution, which is the housing. And if they did honor their own call for housing for all, and then look at our housing system and realize, for example, the actions taken today to augment and improve the capacity for that housing system, they wouldn't be able to say, you're not doing anything, you're not caring, you're not paying attention. You can't listen to today's presentation or the one at their last meeting or the ones to come, or for that matter, a whole variety of other things, and say that we're not paying attention, that we don't care. So these protests are designed to shame council members and to shame the mayor and other community leaders, and also to shame the care providers as being part of a failed system. I don't feel ashamed, even though I know the system is less than it ought to be, less than it can be, less than it will be. I'm not ashamed for trying and not succeeding 100%. I'm only ashamed if I didn't try and didn't notice and didn't care, and none of that's true. So I'd like to get back to doing what we're doing, which is talking about solutions to homelessness, and that means housing, and that means shelter that is intimately tied to housing. And these protests are ways of creating conflict, but not solution. And I think that's their biggest failing, is that they're not going to lead to positive change.
Councilmember Anderson.
So I failed to mention something just for full disclosure. If the protest was just solely about, we need to change our zoning, or we need to purchase more housing for individuals, not that I would understand, necessarily agree with their full methodology, but it would be a little bit more palatable in some respects because it would be more transparent. But if you really look at the root of what they post and what they're calling for, it is about defunding police, and to defund police and then move that funding over to services. That is not in line with what the entire community would necessarily support. As council and city and management, we have a responsibility for all services towards our community, and we don't have finite dollars to do everything. And so we really try to provide balance. Personally, I feel we need law enforcement. And there's a lot of things from human trafficking to child pornography to theft to violence that we need officers in order to provide services and a certain amount of safety net to the community. And I know people will argue that and feel that officers are a problem, and you're entitled to that opinion. But there's a whole host of other community members and businesses and victims who rely on officers and investigation to provide relief for what has happened, and hopefully preventative. So I think it's important for the community to understand that for full transparency is a lot of what they have stated, the goals around some of this protest is about defunding police. So it's just not about homeless and providing services. It's the means that they hope to be able to generate or motivate us, as it was mentioned, you know, shame us, or in a way, I think, harass and threaten us in order to make meet an ends to that mean. But I think it's just important that the community understands the root of it, and makes a decision about how they continue to support. As mentioned by Eric Johnson, there was a lot of community donations, and I'm not saying at all that the community should not care or donate to individuals who are needing those assistance, but I would just plead to the community that the graciousness and the generosity that you feel towards members of our community, please direct that towards well-established social services who have a successful track record of assisting people who are homeless. We heard from a lot of those providers today, and I know that, you know, if you wanted to donate, you know, 5 big bags of dog food, Humane Society, I'm sure, would welcome that type of donation. If you want to donate clothing and funding, I'm sure there are other agencies, especially monetary donations. You know, Lydia, Opportunity Council, Northwest Youth Services, all of them could utilize that generous support. And I do believe it would have a greater impact for the community that you're compassionate to assist.
I don't see any other hands at this time. A quick follow-up question, and then I had some comments of my own. But Mayor Fleetwood or Brian Heinrich or Eric Johnston, I don't know if there's any information that could be provided on 2 fronts. One, the number, if we have any approximate number of campers, right, who were, we'll say, displaced, right, from the clearing of Jerry Field and then at Laurel Park. I'm just curious, protest aside, if we have any indication of the number of actual campers.
That's a really difficult question to answer, you know, definitively. Our estimates are that at Jerry Field, that the weekend prior to the cleanup, there were between 20 and 30 campers. The morning of, I don't think that we saw that many. I don't think we saw 30 campers. There were certainly more than 30 tents, but not all of those tents were occupied at that time. Sorry about that. And it's also safe to say that many of the tents were occupied by the same person. So we should not assume that one tent means one person, because sometimes campers had more than one tent. When we got to Laurel Park, and Brian can help me with this, when we arrived in the morning, there were between, rough count, about 25 tents on site. Don't think I could say that there were 25 campers, but there were about 25 tents on site. There were about 25 to 30 other people in the park at the same time. Some were helping, some were yelling at staff. That's okay. I don't mind being yelled at. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's really hard to say how many campers were there. So my guess, my thumbnail guess, and it is just a guess because it's hard to get a head count because people are obviously moving around, was that at Laurel Field, there were about 20 people on Tuesday morning. At the end of the day, there were about 7 tents left on site at Laurel Field. But again, not all the tents were occupied as a living space. So one of the tents that I was standing next to was not being used as a place for people to live in. It was being used for other activities that none of us would like to see in the park.
Thank you for that. So the other follow-up question is about resources. So I understand that there was, I don't know if it was a handout or just verbally given, but a list of resources to campers of places they could go or contact. And I was just curious if the administration was able to share who are those contacts or resources.
So on March 10th, 11th, and 12th at Jerry Field, or adjacent at Civic Field, the city invited service providers. They're probably, I can get the exact names, but it's who you might expect. Some of whom were on that presented here earlier today. We're there at Civic Field to offer their services and resources. We did not have a handout, and I think I would ask Eric to chime in, but anecdotally, I would share with you that it's entirely likely that every single camper knows what resources are available to them. These folks, many of them are, as you've heard before, they are the hardest to serve, and they're the hardest to serve for a reason. They've been in and out of the system. They are long-term campers. I don't believe that, to be really candid, I don't believe that a handout would have much impact or value at this point. But we did make those services available to folks prior to the Jerry Field cleanup.
Echoing what Brian said there, I'm not aware of a handout that was distributed. There were 4 senior staff members from the city on site at Laurel Park on Friday morning. None of the 4 of us handed anything out. We were consistent in our message to folks when we were asked by not campers, but by members of the community, where are we supposed to go? Our response to them was, you are not allowed to stay in the park. It is illegal to camp in the park. And the first place to start is the base camp facility. And often the response would be, they can't go to base camp. Throughout the course of these days and cleaning these facilities up, or engaging with campers, or trying to find support, or talking to people as the case may be, and I have personally been in these camps many times over the last 4 or 5 months now, and I've talked to campers individually. I have often asked the question, why is base camp not an option for you? And almost consistently the response, well, the responses vary a little bit, but it is consistently, I choose not to go there. It does not fit into what I would like to do. One individual said those people are boring. He just needs a place to be weird. Okay, fine, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's a choice that individual makes. I'm sure that there are folks who, there was one individual on Friday that I'm aware of who had his stuff, or brought his stuff down to Maritime Heritage Park. And throughout the day, eventually asked if the city could store his property, to which we said, of course, yes. We dispatched public works crew down to collect his belongings and store them at the Bellingham Police Department, like we do with that. And then he went to base camp. So the campers and people who are homeless, I hate to be, sorry for the terminology there, but people who are experiencing homelessness, who are in these locations, know very well that they have access to base camp and where to go to get that, or the Opportunity Council, or other options. But many of them, for various reasons, are either choosing not to use them, or ever making other choices in their life. So that's a difficult question, unfortunately, to address. And I hate that. I'm trying very hard not to generalize, because that's not the case. Each of these people are individuals. They very truly are. And they're good people to talk to, right? They're in a very difficult spot in their life, but we did not hand out a resource list. Brian's correct. We had the Civic Field Resource Facility available for a couple of days prior. We were consistent in our message on Friday that the first place to start is the base camp, and that there was space available on Friday morning for people to go. And we were also consistent in our message to campers that if you would like, we will store your belongings for up to 60 days. You tell us what to store and we will store it. If it is clean and we are able to, we will be happy to store those belongings. And we did have 1 or 2 people take us up on that, but by and large, folks chose not to use that resource.
Thank you for that follow-up. And I think it's important, I mean, that differentiation between those who are currently unhoused and sleeping in tents in our community, and volunteers in the community who have been making donations and providing, support in a variety of fashion, and protesters who have repeatedly articulated demands, right, to the mayor as well as council members through whether that be public comment in the form of, oral testimony or emails, voicemails, a variety of ways. But what Director Johnson just said is very important, that each of these people are individuals, and the work of the city and the continuum of services that we've been looking at, is really to provide a broad base of services and a wide variety of services, but services that are aimed at serving a broad population of individuals who are in sort of a particular place or have particular needs. And we're not in a position to be able to provide individualized services on a case-by-case basis, right? I mean, unfortunately, that's not what the city is able to do as a government entity, but we partner with social service agencies who, do a lot of that outreach within the community. But I feel like we've been silent or maybe haven't addressed what people were calling for. And I believe that we're likely all on the same page, but I think it's worth articulating clearly that when people are asking or demanding for absolutes, I mean, there's very rarely an absolute in any of the worlds that, I live or operate in. There's always some exception. And so things like amnesty for all protesters, to drop all charges and cease all investigations related to the 28th of January at City Hall. One, that raises concern for me as a council member with accountability and criminal activity in our community and seeing things escalate and wanting to make sure that, that there is accountability and that if things transpire, that we do follow through on that. And when we talk about permanent, no barrier housing for all, I think we've discussed that previously, but maybe not specifically articulated the harm that can do within, looking at that continuum of services and hearing from providers today. One of the gaps, wasn't sort of the need for a permanent no barrier housing, because I feel like permanent no barrier housing for all is something that, in my opinion, would undermine and sort of perpetuate homelessness and would really restrict individuals' abilities to move through, right, and transition through those continuum of services. And I don't think it's something that we can, condone or support. And so when you're asked for something like that and saying, where are people supposed to go? The concern is about the misinformation about base camp and, well, people who have been using can't go there. And the reality is you can't use on site, right? I mean, there are places where these programs, yes, have rules, and the rules are in place to protect the residents there as well as the broader community. And it's an essential part of providing those services and being able to support people in finding success. And similarly, the permanent ban on all encampment sweeps. I mean, I think we've acknowledged that our policy really has been to leave people in place. If this has been their choice and they are not, base camp isn't the place for them, or they're on hard times and they haven't been able to, secure sort of conventional housing as we know it, and they're maybe in a process, that we're not going to, just chase them around the city. But we do have some accountability issues with respect to public health and safety concerns. And the reality is that we can't turn a blind eye and say that all encampments, will never be touched. We've seen stark examples of the concerns for public health and safety that arise. And again, maybe sometimes it's, out of an individual's concern, but it's at a risk to the individual who's staying in that location and living in that situation, as well as to the broader community that surrounds, those individuals. And so I just really want the broader community to understand that what's being advocated for, I really believe, is a disservice to the people that these individuals are claiming to try and protect and serve. And so I want to, again, acknowledge the hard work of our staff and the teamwork across with the county and other service providers to really stay the course on this incredibly difficult journey and acknowledge the broad support of programs that are in place and the actions that we talked about earlier today that, you know, we're taking to continue to expand funding and also expand capacity. And so certainly every individual, you know, matters, and we're hoping to be able to help everybody, but we also have to keep our eye on, you know, on making sure that we don't increase those numbers, right? And if we take our eye off the ball and sort of these programs further down the continuum that are helping rental assistance and other things that are helping to prevent people from slipping into the situation where they are unsheltered, that's, you know, that's, in my opinion, some of the most important work that we're doing, because at that point, you know, you have much better fighting chance to keep someone there versus how much more difficult it becomes once you've lost that housing and now you're trying to re-enter. And so I'm not asking for a vote from the council, but I think that it's important that we're all on the same page in some respects, and that as an administration, as a council, that, you know, we're doing this work sort of in lockstep. There will be times when there's disagreement and, you know, some tensions and some pushback. But the reality is that we're all, you know, moving in the same direction with the same end goal in mind. So I just want to extend that appreciation and acknowledge that that work continues, and we know there's a lot left to do. So any further comments or questions or concerns? We're an older new business. No. Okay. This afternoon going forward, we have now 3 items in executive session. So we're going to be breaking for executive session, and then we will reconvene this evening at 7 p.m. In executive session, we now have, like I said, 3 items. The first is potential litigation. This matter will be covered by Rafato, and that's changed to approximately 10 minutes. And item number 2, potential property acquisition, handled by Herb, for approximately 15 minutes. And the new addition is litigation, Bornstein Seafoods versus City of Bellingham et al. And that'll be covered by Brady, approximately 15 minutes. So council members have a separate link to join executive session, and we will reconvene there and see the rest of the public this evening at 7 p.m. Thank you.